Alright, hi everyone. I'm here to talk to you today about HTML5 gaming, specifically multiplayer gaming. It's something I've been working on a little bit at university and just over the last sort of year or so. I want to explore the technologies that are involved in it, the issues behind it, and sort of how to accomplish multiplayer gaming with the technologies that are available today. So I wrote this talk about 37,000 feet up in the air, so this is a little disclaimer. I was at a Mozilla event last week and it was pretty screwy with my brain, so I apologise if any of this is a bit doesn't make much sense. It should do, we'll see. It was a great event though. You don't really see the creator of JavaScript making cocktails for the whole company that often, so it was quite cool. But yeah, so I'm just saying I'm a bit jet lagged, so just excuse that. So I originally got sort of involved in multiplayer games when I was a kid. My dad owned a cyber cafe, and basically there were 20 network computers, and what do you do with 20 network computers and a room full of geeks? You play multiplayer Doom. So that was how I started. I just played against these 20-odd-year-old men while I was a kid with Doom, and I used to win. I didn't know what I was doing, I was just shooting the things on the screen, but hey, it was fun. But this was only local network, this wasn't on the internet yet. So my first internet multiplayer game was Red Alert. Does anyone remember that? It's a fantastic game, it had a great soundtrack. And this was great because it allowed me to play against complete strangers, all my friends, on the internet, and this was a complete novelty to me and I found it fantastic. So I came to the conclusion that playing with friends is fun, and multiplayer gaming is to play with your friends. I mean, what is an FPS for, an online FPS, if it wasn't to shoot your friends in the face? That is essentially what multiplayer games are for. So where does HTML5 come in? Well, technologies in the browser have now come to a point where you can create these kinds of games using native technologies. You don't need Flash, you don't need to create desktop apps. You can use HTML5 and JavaScript to create 3D games, 2D games, whatever, and now there's technologies available to let you play with multiplayer. And these are through things like WebSockets, which we'll touch on in a moment. And just to clarify, by HTML5 I do mean HTML5 as in the HTML code, and JavaScript as in the way you access that HTML code. But I'll just refer to it as HTML5 because it's easier. So why is this important? Well, this is important because it's now breaking the barrier down between these closed technologies like Flash and the native technologies created using programming languages that everyone as a web developer is comfortable with, which is HTML and JavaScript. It's nothing complicated. And multiplayer is an issue at the moment because although the technology exists, it's not necessarily supported fully at the moment, which is an issue. And it's something that you need to be aware of, because if you're going to create these kinds of games, you need to work around it. So the technology involved, as we know, is HTML and JavaScript, but there's more to that. So on the HTML side, you've got the canvas element, which is creating your 2D graphics, which is all your fancy visual stuff. It's nothing to do with the multiplayer. It's fairly well supported now in all the major browsers, so it's nothing to worry about. And then for the multiplayer networking, you've got WebSockets. And WebSockets are something fairly new, and they're not fully supported in all the browsers yet. They were actually removed in Firefox recently, and I'll touch on that later. So the difference with WebSockets is normal web traffic is one way. So you send a request out and you get a response back. That's how it works. It's not necessarily real time and it's not two-way. WebSockets changes that completely. It upgrades HTTP into a two-way stream. So you can literally stream data. You don't have to request it like Ajax anymore. You just open a socket connection and data just gets pushed down to you as and when it happens. And this is perfect for gaming. It's accessed through a JavaScript API as well, so it's fantastically easy to use. And the way you can, the technologies I mentioned before with the JavaScript are client-side. So this is stuff that's based in the browser using normal JavaScript that you use as web developers every day. On the server side, to create this server that streams the information of your game back, you can use things like Node.js, which is JavaScript on the server. And they have plugins for Node which allow you to create WebSocket servers, and it's just as easy as using JavaScript on the client side. It's all documented. I'm not going to run through specific code for this because it would just be pointless. I'm running through these sort of the higher level concepts that you need to do multiplayer gaming. But Node.js is just one option. You could use, if you really wanted, you could use something like PHP. It might not be the best solution, but the thing with Node is it's being actively developed quite quickly at the moment, and it's very fast. But if you don't want to use Node, the problem with Node is that you have to create all these communication WebSockets, work out how to send all the stuff yourself, and you have to do it manually. So it takes a bit of effort, and unless you create a sort of a framework to use every time you make a game, you're going to have to do it over and over and over again. So people have come up with frameworks and have set up companies around creating systems to take that off you and to give you a communication framework that you can use to make games or to make real-time applications and stuff. And one of these is Carsing. I've not used Carsing before, but I know the guys behind it. And basically what it is it's just a communication engine. So you set up a Carsing server and you can, it takes care of all the nitty-gritty things of like networking, real-time networking and stuff. So you don't have to keep setting it up all the time with Node, and you don't have to worry about managing how many people are on your server and all sorts of stuff like that. I'm not going to go into these in too much detail, just it's nice to be aware that these solutions are around. There's another one called Electro Server, which Seb introduced me to. I've not actually had time to use this again yet, but it's the same concept where it takes the lower level details out of your hands, so you can just worry about making your game rather than making the communication system with WebSockets and whatever you want. Electro Server looks quite promising on a personal level because it's just added support for HTML5 and JavaScript and all that kind of stuff. So I'd definitely have a look into it, and they have demos on the website, and I know there's inroads with Flash games previously. So these are great, and yeah, okay, they solve all the problems, but I want to sort of go over the problems specifically because it's important to be aware of them regardless of whether you use these engines or not. So there's some game engines around that sort of take the game side of things off your hands as well. So you've got the networking side, yeah, that's fun, great, we'll get on that into a second. But the game engine side, you don't want to have to keep creating your games by scratch all the time as well. So there's game engines around. There's one called Impact, which is paid for, it's $99, but it's quite fun. And like they say, it's the awesomest way to create HTML5 games. And I wrote a tutorial on this recently, and it's the best game engine I've seen out there today. It has good documentation, the author is friendly, he's on IRC all the time, he helps, and that makes a massive difference. And I think the $99 is well worth it for a license that lasts the length of the version number. So this takes the game logic off, and Impact, for example, has a module that allows you to use WebSockets. So you can then start plugging in communications on top. So you don't have to worry about creating these games, you worry about how your specific game works. And there's another one that's really promising that hasn't actually come out yet, but it's called Isogenic Engine. And this could potentially be one of the best ones out there. This has got multiplayer built in, so this is probably going to be one of the only engines that allows you to do everything all in one and not have to worry about all the nitty-gritty stuff. I encourage you to check the videos out on the website for this as well, because it's really, really interesting. So this is great, but what can you do with it? So I was going to have more examples, but I didn't have internet access up on the plane. So I'm using my game that I created at university called Rockets, and this is a basic HTML5 WebSockets game. It was basically my excuse to sort of see how WebSockets worked. So this is an example of the earlier version, and basically people just float around as little triangles, or people call them Christmas trees. And you just shoot each other, and that's it. And it was an experiment to see how I could get different people to connect through Twitter, that's how they logged into the game, and where their usernames come from, and to see how easy it was to send hundreds of bits of data across the server, like the bullets and the movements and stuff like that. It turns out it's not that hard. The hardest thing is coming up with the solutions to the little networking problems and all sorts of gaming issues like bandwidth issues and stuff like that. And this is where the problems come in with HTML5 gaming. And I'm going to highlight the sort of most important few. So the most important one is WebSocket support is lacking. Firefox, like I said, has removed it. That's for a security issue. I spoke to some people while I was out there and they have said that it's coming back. They don't know which version it will be back in, but it will be soon. They're not going to put it back in until the spec is properly secure, which apparently is happening, which is good news. IE 9 doesn't support it either. There is a beta version or a developer version of IE 9 that does have it. I understand the reasoning for not putting it in, but it's a shame because that would have been a fantastic feature to have. So there is an issue with this, but the solution is there is a library called Socket.io which allows you to have flash fallback. So there's solutions out there which allow you to use the same code, but it just allows it to work in IE below 9 as well, and all sorts of other browsers that might not necessarily support WebSockets. So it's not a massive issue, it's just an important one. Another one is, I don't know how much you guys know about networking, but WebSockets only uses TCP, which is a method of sending data that means everything has to be sent in order, everything has to be received in order. And it can cause problems because if there's some sort of lag or your internet connection goes down or whatever, nothing's going to happen in your game until all of those pieces of data come back in the order that they were sent in. So you can get some really big hang-ups and it can cause massive problems. So what a lot of games use nowadays is UDP, which is a version of sending data back and forth that doesn't worry about order. All it cares about is getting data out there as fast as possible, and it doesn't care what order it comes back in. So what this allows you to do is allows you to forget about things like lag and stuff. And if someone sort of has their connection gets stuck or their internet connection goes down, when it comes back again, you just pick up where they left off from. You don't have to worry about the ones that were left behind before. You just care about the newest data that's coming back in. And this is really good, but WebSockets doesn't support it. So this is a massive problem. You can still create games using TCP, but you have to be very aware that you can get into these issues where things get stuck. And linked into this, there's latency issues. So you can't avoid slow internet connections. You can't avoid people being connected on mobile phone networks and stuff like that. So you have to think about this when you're making your games. It's common sense, but if you're not aware of it, like I wasn't aware of it when I was creating Raw-Kits at the beginning, and there were massive issues where everything just slowed down because I just didn't think about it. And there's things like hardware acceleration in Canvas. It's not fully supported across all the platforms yet. It's not as good on Mac as it is in Windows. In fact, it doesn't really exist properly on the Mac like it does in Windows. So there's issues you've got to think about and be aware of with the browser as well. And the complexity. It's, like as I can see from some of your faces, it's quite complex, this kind of stuff. It's hardcore networking, and this is one of the biggest problems with it, is that there's a massive barrier to entry for this kind of stuff. Yes, okay, it's JavaScript and HTML, it's basic technologies, but it's the concepts behind it and the issues behind it that are the most difficult, and these are the ones that we need to overcome. And this is where I'm hoping some of the game engines and the communication frameworks that I was telling you about will help. So there are some solutions to this. One of them is compression. So when I was talking about sort of data you have to use TCP and it has to go in order and blah, blah, blah. There's ways to sort of help this issue, and that's by not sending as much data. So the way you can do that is by compressing it. So what you can do is as simply as sending less data out there. It sounds simple, but it's the best way. So to put it in context, WebSockets only sends data as text. So it's not compressed naturally, so it's plain text. So I wouldn't send your password out for it, for example. So what you can do, with that is, say you're sending a long string, well, cut that string down if it's plain text. Don't add a full stop on the end. Don't replace characters. There's ways to cut things down. And you can also use things like JSON to compress strings down, and there's even a binary version of JSON called Bison, which I found incredibly useful creating Raw-Kits because it cut down my data incredibly. And just those few methods can really, really help. And there's also things like rate limiting. So with the latency issues and stuff, you need to be careful about the amount of data you're sending. If you send way too much data out, it's going to get hung up. People are going to get really slow games. They're going to be sending an update out and it's not going to come back for ages, and that's just bad because people slow down and you can't shoot your friend. So you just need to be aware of these things, and I'm just going to highlight some of the sort of issues surrounding that. So if you've got one player in a game, it's not multiplayer, but just bear with me. You've got one player in the game, you're sending one message every frame in, saying, I'm in this XY position. The server goes, okay, that's great, sends it back, and it's 1 to 1, that's fine. 2 people, 2 updates come in, but because the server has to send 2 updates back out, that's to each player, 1 for each player, that's 4 updates, so you've just doubled the amount of data that's coming back out. Sorry, you've quadrupled it. And again, 4 players, 4 pieces of information coming in, 16 pieces coming out. So you can see what's happening. It's the square root of the input. Not square root, sorry, it's the square of the input. 30 players, it's a big multiplayer game now. 900 messages going out and only 30 coming in. You can see where you need to be careful now with data, because that XY position was fine for one player, but if you're sending 900 XY positions every frame, that's like every 30 milliseconds maybe, that is a lot of data. But imagine you were doing massively multiplayer, okay? Imagine you had 100 players. That's 10,000 pieces of data going back out every 30 milliseconds. That's incredible. That's blew my mind when I heard that. I was like, what? That's a lot of data. So you just need to be aware, you need to be careful, you need to cut down your data, you need to send data only for people that need it. So for example, one way to really cut this down is these 100 players might not all be on the same screen at the same time. So you need to, if you know where a player is in the game, you know what players are around them. There might only be 10 players around him. That means you can cut down the data massively. So this was a problem I had with the game, was I was sending data for absolutely everyone in the game, even if you couldn't see them on the screen, and that was just slowing down things and was completely unnecessary. So just be aware of these things. It's simple changes that can make such a big difference, and it's really important with HTML5 and JavaScript because it's just not fast enough yet, especially with WebSockets, for you to be silly with these kinds of things. You can also do little things like optimizing canvas. Yeah, okay, it won't change the networking, but it would free up some resources. So you can use hardware acceleration on Windows. That's great if you're using Windows. You could use request animation frame instead of doing a JavaScript timeout loop. So what this does is instead of you forcefully saying, I want you to refresh my animation frame every 30 milliseconds, you ask the browser, can I have a new frame please? And the browser does it in the most optimal way. And it just helps speed things up because it's done natively. You can also use like images images and CSS instead of doing gradients and shadows in Canvas, because that's just unnecessary. It's going to slow things down. So for example, using things like sprites. And don't be afraid to use multiple canvas elements. This is something that I've seen before where people think you can only draw on one canvas element. No, they're transparent. So layer them up behind each other. Have the background with like a parallax star effect on one canvas element, and have all the moving rockets, like in the Rockets game, moving around on another canvas element. So you're only updating one canvas element really, because the background one isn't going to change as often. And it just saves a small amount of resources, but it makes a difference. So on top of that, there's another issue which is a victim of open technologies, and that's cheating and manipulation. And I hated the people who cheated my game when I first found out about it, but now I love them because they opened my eyes up to how crap the coding was and how little I knew about multiplayer gaming, and it was a massive help. But I was so naive when I created it. I thought, oh no, the JavaScript's fine, like no one's going to bother to go into the console and try and hack into it. I don't even know how they were going to do it anyway. And I was completely wrong. Like the day after I released it, someone had put in rapid fire. An hour later he was moving at infinite speed. And then after that he was invincible. Someone added in a bomb into the game. It was insane. It was so annoying. He found it hilarious. I didn't, because I kept dying, but because of the open technologies and the fact that he went in and tested my game for me, I had a crowd of people on Twitter that came into my game and decided, although they were playing it, they were effectively testing it. So I had free testers. I had like 30 people testing my game, and you can't get that really. And And it was great, because it was open, they went into my code, digged around and found the holes. And so I, through watching them cheat my game, found all of these issues that I could fix. And it turns out there was quite a lot. But so how did you fix these problems? Well, it all really came about because my code was open. So although the JavaScript is an open technology, that's different. That's a different kind of open. What I mean is, everything I created was public. So all of my variables were public, all of my functions were public, everything was public. I didn't really think about them too much when I created them. So all they did is overwrote one of my functions for shooting, and then they had 1,000 bullets a second instead of 1. So it was very, very easy to do. So there's ways around that. You can use like JavaScript closures, you can use private variables. Okay, yeah, they're not technically private, but the way you use them in closures and stuff, it's effectively the same thing. And it might not be the sort of the silver bullet for sort of stopping cheaters, but it will prevent it being as easy for them, and it will stop the people that are just doing it for a laugh from doing it, but it won't stop them entirely. And there's other ways to do that. So one way is to move all your important logic to the server, and this is a really important lesson. So Rawkits originally, and on the version that's still online, but you didn't hear that from me, will be updated to have logic on the server. And what this means is that all of the player updates, like the positions of the players, where the bullets are, when a bullet is fired, how much health people have, how many bullets people have, all of that kind of stuff is going to be sort of dealt with on the server. And by doing that, all the client has to do, all the browser has to do is say, I want you to shoot from my player, or I want you to move me forward. You don't say, I'm moving forward 20 pixels like you do now, because then you could just change it to say, I'm moving 200 pixels. What you do now is just say, I've pressed the up arrow, and then the server goes, okay, thank you for that, I'm going to move you 1 pixel and send you back your new position. So what that means is you can't cheat that anymore, because you might, you might send the browser 1,000 up arrow requests, but as long as you've got some sort of security on the server to say, well, hang on a sec, that's a bit weird, I'm only going to move you, say, 1 pixel a second, that would be very slow, but it means that you've got security on the server that can't necessarily be got to as easily as it could be on the client side, unless your server's insecure, which is a different problem. So just moving that kind of stuff is a massively important issue, and it's one that can solve so many problems straight away, and it's such a simple thing to do. Another one related is server authority. So I've kind of just gone over it, which is basically whatever the server says is right, and whatever the client says cannot be trusted, because if someone's going to cheat, they're going to cheat, and you know people are going to cheat. That's just the way things happen. So if the client says, I'm going to move 1,000 key presses forward, you know you can't trust that. So you need to tell your server that it can't trust it. You need to give server authority to say, no, that's impossible. You can't do that. Or if the client goes, actually, no, I'm over here, the server goes, well, no, you're wrong, because I think you're here, so actually you're going to move here. So the server has authority to say, I think you're cheating, I'm going to put you back where you should be. And what this does is it allows players to cheat their own game, so they'd screw up their own display. They might have 1,000 bullets on their own screen, but it won't change anything for the other players, because the server wouldn't let it go through, or it would update them on the next sort of sync with the client. It gets a little bit sort of complicated, the specifics of how to do this, but I'm just going through the higher level concepts of what the solutions are. So this is a massive issue, and it's something that can really, really, really help. And it's important for the physics engines that you have in your game as well. So there's some more resources to sort of go with this. There's not really any on JavaScript gaming, not specifically at least, not for multiplayer. One that I found really useful was a website called Gaffer on Games, and this guy sort of does games programming as a job, and although it's written in like C++, something like that, the concepts are really important. So he goes through like how to create networked physics and how to just create game physics and stuff like that. And it's useful to sort of read through because it teaches you a lot, even though you might not necessarily use it in JavaScript in exactly the same way. The kind of higher level concepts that I've talked about, just in much more detail. There's also like most of the game developers like Valve, they like wikify their development processes and stuff like that. So Valve have got some really great development posts about how they do networking and how they stop like players looking like they were sort of a meter away from when they were, and how they decide who got shot and stuff like that. And for those who don't know, Valve are the people who made like Half-Life and the Half-Life engine and stuff like that. There's also Bungie, the guys behind Halo. They did a talk recently at the Game Developers Conference about Halo Reach. It's called I Shot You First. It's a 500 megabyte PowerPoint. I don't know why they did a 500 megabyte PowerPoint, but hey. But I'd advise you to look at it because it's really, really, really interesting. Even if you're not that interested in making the games yourself, the concepts behind it are just quite cool. The way they came over the problems about how to decide who got shot first, how to make sure that the arc of a grenade was the same on every single screen, how to make sure that a warthog, if you don't know what warthog is like a jeep, how to make sure that a warthog squashed the right person, it's stuff like that. You'd think it was easy, but the issues behind it and the solutions behind it are so interesting and clever that it's worth a read. So, are we ready? Are we ready for HTML5 multiplayer games? Well, sort of. We have most of the technologies. We have the know-how. There's nothing to stop us really, apart from the solutions aren't ideal. So there's so much that can be improved upon, like the UDP support, the compression of data, all that kind of stuff. The fact that it's a complete mindfuck to work your way around it. You're using the open technology, so you need to be aware of that people can access your code. So that's a completely different issue, I suppose. If that's an issue for you, for creating open web games, then you shouldn't be using JavaScript, you shouldn't be using HTML. That's not what they were made for. Use something like Flash where you can control the security of your game a little bit better. People can still get into it, but it's better. So in short, I suppose we're ready, but it's not exactly easy to accomplish, so you just got to be aware of that. So I've got a proposal. So my proposal is, I've learned a lot through developing these games, and I think there needs to be a resource for this JavaScript and HTML5 gaming, particularly with networking and multiplayer kind of stuff, because it's just completely screwy. So I'm going to plan to document my journey with this kind of stuff, with the development I've been doing with HTML5 and JavaScript. I feel the existing documentation isn't that great for these technologies. The documentation for the other technologies are fantastic, so I'm going to learn from that. I'm going to take things like Gaffer on Games and try and create a JavaScript version of that to help other people. So I'm hoping that it might reduce the barrier of entry for these kinds of things, and coupled with the gaming engine and stuff like that, it might allow more people to start using these for just simple games. They don't want to necessarily learn how to do multiplayer networking. I'm sure all of you guys don't want to spend weeks and hours just working out how to learn networking protocols and stuff. If you could just do that in JavaScript tutorials, that would be fantastic. So I'm going to try and do that. So my name's Rob Hawks. That's my Twitter, @RobHawks. It's my blog, rauks.com. I just got a new job at Mozilla, so I'll start that in June. And I do Explicit Web Podcast, which is a web design and development podcast. I do that with Hannah, who's here today, and John and Nolan. And I advise you listen to that. It's on iTunes. I've written a book on HTML5 Canvas and creating games using it as well. Not multiplayer, but it goes through everything from learning HTML5 to a little bit of JavaScript to everything about Canvas and how to make games. So that's on Amazon. You should definitely go pre-order it. It'll be out this month as well, so it'll be good. So thank you very much, and if anyone's got any questions, just let me know.
Are you using any Node.js or anything for the raw kits rebuild?
Okay, so the question was, am I using Node.js for the raw kits rebuild? Yes, I will be. I found that that's the easiest to use and the most reliable way of getting WebSockets for gaming. So, yeah, is the answer to that question.
You said about building a site or something documenting building games in HTML5 and the related technologies. Would it not be better to kind of build that as a sort of extra on one of the existing large-scale game development communities, like say Game Day, and just start up a sort of HTML sort of section of that?
Mm-hmm. It's a definite solution to the problem. The question was, with the resource for HTML5 gaming that I was suggesting, would it be better to implement it into an existing community? Yeah? Basically, it would be a good idea. I was just thinking to put it on my blog, but if it would be better to add it into a community with people that want to learn about it, with the people that are already on there, then I would definitely be open to that. So,
I've not had much interaction with game dev in the last, say, decade.
Okay.
I remember back in the day, they were actually really friendly bunch that were quite handy when I was foolishly trying to create game engines in C.
Cool. No, I'll definitely look into that. Thank you.
With the stuff you were saying about WebSockets, is it possible to communicate peer-to-peer with other clients in the game, or does all communication have to be via the server?
Okay, that's a good point. The question was, does WebSockets allow you to communicate peer-to-peer, or is it just between the client and the server? The answer is, at the moment, it's just between the client and the server. That is a massive downside to WebSockets. However, Ericsson Labs have just tested and released a specification for streaming communication using, I think it was using WebSockets, or at least streaming communication through the browser. So I also know that guys at Firefox have been looking into that. There's no sort of word on if it would be implemented and all that kind of stuff, but it's coming, is all I can say, and that would be an amazing addition, not only for like making Skype in the browser, but for gaming and stuff like that. So definitely.
How well does Canvas work on mobile devices, iPads, iPhones? How well does it work on with the touchscreens and the more limited power available?
Okay, so the question was, how well does Canvas cope on mobile devices? Not as well as it should. Seb, is it better on the iPad too?
What was the question?
Sorry. How well does Canvas cope on mobile devices?
It's better on iPad too, but it's still pretty slow, to be honest. I'll show some demos actually.
Cool. Okay, yeah, so Seb's going to show some demos later, but you got it now. Yeah, it's not as good as it could be. I mean, you still have touch interaction and stuff that's built into JavaScript, so you don't need to worry about that. But you definitely need to be aware that it's going to be slower on a mobile phone. It's just sort of common sense, really, but there's definitely room for improvement.
I was wondering, you didn't mention Comet. Is there anything against Comet at all?
No, sorry, so I didn't mention Comet. There's nothing against it, it's just, it wasn't one of the technologies I've looked into particularly. Do you have any particular reason why you brought that up? Or?
We've done some experiments with a poker client using Comet because the back end's Java. So.
Okay. Yeah, is Comet still a one-way transaction, or?
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah. So I mean, so WebSockets is still, it's an upgrade to the way Comet would be used because it's two-way. Yeah, but I mean, it's a solution. Socket.io, I forgot to mention, falls back to Flash, but it can fall back to things like Comet and Ajax and those technologies as well if you wanted it to and you built your game to support that. So that kind of functionality can be used. There's nothing to stop you using that at the back.
If you're going to use like a peer-to-peer communication system for gaming, how would you get over the same problem with the cheating? Is there any way you can use the sort of verification but still just have most of the data communicating between peers?
That's a good point and something I haven't thought about. Because yeah, if you take the server away, then the security's got to be done on the client side, and if the client can look at the code and change the way the code works, then it's not going to be secure. So that would definitely have to be an issue to look into, and I can't come up with a solution right now. But yeah, that would be a problem. That's a good problem to uncover. So don't know if you want to do that. No, no, but it's definitely something to be aware of.
So just as an addendum to that one, I'm fairly sure that problem, that security problem, is the reason why most game companies have moved away from peer-to-peer games to client-server games.
Yeah, that would make sense. So the gentleman there was just saying how most gaming companies have moved away from peer-to-peer gaming because of the security issues and the overhead, I suppose, with keeping those kind of communications secure.
I'm kind of playing devil's advocate here, but why would I build a game in HTML5 instead of Flash? What are the benefits?
Well, another question to come straight onto that is why? Okay, so why would you want to use HTML5? You don't have to use it. The point I was getting at with, say, how, if you don't want to have your code open, then use Flash. There is no battle between Flash and Canvas and HTML5. There seems to be an issue where people think, and I'm not saying this is what you're thinking, but people seem to think that one should be better than the other, or one should do something and the other one shouldn't. That's not what they were built for. Canvas and WebSockets and stuff has been built to bring this technology into the browser. And if you are happy with those kind of technologies and you're happy with your code being open and you are just making something just for the browser, then give Canvas and WebSockets a go. If you want it to be a little bit more secure and you want to use the functionalities that Flash brings, use Flash or another technology. For example, if you wanted it to work on the desktop, or, well, Canvas would, browser stuff would work offline, but it's whatever. There's reasons for using each of them, and I don't think there should be a battle between them.
I guess my question is there any benefit other than hardware acceleration on Macs and the fact that it runs on iOS, which are obviously big things, but is there any other reason to...
So particular benefits to using just Canvas or HTML5 as... I don't think, well, there's not really a killer reason, because it's not meant to replace it, so it's comparing two things that shouldn't be compared. It's just because they both do graphics doesn't mean one should be better than the other. So I think the way I decide is if I'm doing something on the web and for a browser, I would use the browser version of the technology. If I'm not, then use Flash or something like that. But you have to remember that Flash came before, so Flash is doing a lot of things better. Like, it's much faster. So that is one thing. Even with like hardware acceleration and stuff, Flash is further ahead than Canvas is at the moment, and I'm sure Seb might point it out later, but you need to be...
Ask me that question.
Yeah. We need to be friendly to Flash people, because they have learned from the lessons of cranking out as much power as you can from the 2D graphics engine and stuff like that. So yeah, there is no killer reason why you should use one or the other. It's just, it should be a personal issue or a issue to do with what you're trying to aim your product towards. It's the best answer I can give.
Okay.
So,
I was going to say let's take a break and have a drink, but I don't know. Yeah, we are running a bit late.
okay, no, that's fine.
Okay, well, I mean, you can come and talk to Rob.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna. Sorry, can I just jump in?
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm gonna be leaving at 9. So if you want to grab me either in the break or on my Twitter @RobHawks or rob@rawks.com is my email, and I will be happy to help you. Okay.
Cool.
Cheers.